The original Killzone was one of my favorite first-person shooters on the PS2. It was initially hyped as a Halo killer and was rushed to beat the release of Halo 2 to the market, causing the game to be shipped in a mostly finished state. There were quite a few technical issues and glitches in the game, causing it to receive low to average review scores and be ridiculed all around. While there are quite a few first-person shooters on the PS2 I like better, I found that if you can get past the technical issues and adjust the controls, you'll find a shooter with its own kind of intensity in its gunfights, and a really unique World War II meets sci-fi atmosphere. It also had some decent online play, even if the online options were limited, and the game usually devolved into people grabbing the explosive weapon or just cooking grenades to blow up their opponents for quick kills. Killzone was a decent secondary online PS2 game to play for those times whenever you got tired of SOCOM, Battlefield 2, or for me, Delta Force Black Hawk Down. Overall, the original was flawed for sure, but solid if you can get past its glitches. It certainly wasn't a Halo killer. It wasn't even trying to be Halo. Do you remember when the developers of Amped, the launch game for the original Xbox, got caught using a Photoshop lens flare in their screenshots prior to the Xbox's release? No? I guess you don't, as I'm probably the only person who has thought of this in the last decade. There was some controversy over the screenshots at the time, as if they were trying to lie about the graphical capabilities of the Xbox. Welp. As it's been infamously documented, Sony said, "Hold my beer, here's a Killzone 2 trailer," at their 2005 E3 press conference after a long-winded presentation about the still-yet-to-be-revealed PS3 system's hardware. Attendees were then shown tech demos like the one of Unreal 3 engine running on the system. However, the Killzone 2 demo stole the show for those hungry to finally see the system's graphical capabilities. Very quickly, gamers and the gaming press were quick to question whether or not it was a pre-rendered cutscene or actual in-game footage. As it turns out, they were right to be suspicious, as it was later revealed to be CGI, which is one of the many early embarrassments for Sony when it came to the PS3. They got caught lying, even if they later tried to pass it off as a mock-up for what the game is going to look like. It would be 2 whole years before Killzone 2 would resurface with an actual in-game trailer at E3 2007, where it was clear that Guerrilla Games had been programming their fingers to the bone in order to make the final game look as good as that mock-up trailer from 2005 as possible. In fact, it was that fake trailer that kept the game on everyone's radar. As IGN put it, without that target video, would many people have really shown that much interest in Killzone 2, the sequel to a PS2 game that was hugely hyped, but wound up under-delivering? No, it was the target video that stoked the flames of interest, convincing those in attendance at the press conference for a brief, shining moment that Killzone 2 could be a major contender. Sure, it all came crashing down soon after, but the point is, from that moment on, Killzone 2 became a symbol of Sony's hype machine. Whether you wanted to take vicarious pleasure in Sony and Guerrilla Games failing to live up to the pre-rendered vision of the game, or you were clinging to the hope that they'd come through with the goods, Killzone 2 was well and truly on everyone's radar. The game would finally hit in February 2009 and was another great exclusive for the PS3, which was still trying to catch up to the Xbox 360 in sales. After an incredibly rocky start, the 360 had a better online service, gamer score, a year head start, a cheaper price, and most third-party games ran and looked better on the 360. That is, if the system was actually working to run them, making the early years of the 7th gen console war a rough one for Sony. If you frequented online gaming sites or message boards, the first few years of the PS3 were all doom and gloom. It didn't help that this was the time where gaming magazines were dying, and from my experience, the online outlets became very sensationalistic for clicks. Negativity gets clicks, and I remember seeing a ton of articles stoking the fanboy flame war drama of the day. I'm absolutely not saying that Sony didn't deserve some of the negative coverage, releasing a $600 machine that, from the evidence of multi-platform games, wasn't the more powerful system that the rabid Sony fanboys swore up and down it was. Most third-party developers had a lot of trouble developing PS3 games thanks to the complexity of the cell processor in the system, so the average third-party developer didn't have have the time or the money to devote to learning how to get more out of the system. They just ported their games in the traditional manner, using the cell processor as a traditional CPU and using the RSX to handle the graphics. It didn't help that Sony wasn't being very helpful with their development tools given to the third-party developers either. Insomniac Games eventually stepped up and started a tech-sharing initiative called Nocturnal, where they would share elements of their source code with other prospective PS3 developers to help those struggling with PS3 development get a leg up on developing for the system. In the first couple of years of the PS3's life, it really couldn't compete with the 360, which had a better online service, gamer score, and big-name games like Halo 3, COD 4, and Gears of War. If you were an online gamer, and most of us were at the time, looking for the best competitive games online, the 360 was where it was at. Games like Resistance, Fallen Man, and Warhawk were fun and definitely worth playing online, but they didn't have the same MLG professional gamer coolness factor that Halo 3 had. Call of Duty 4 was also on the PS3, but it didn't have the later implemented trophy support. It still doesn't to this day. Nor did Sony's online service make it as easy to maintain that social aspect, lacking the cross-game party chat feature of Xbox Live. The 360 was cheaper, had better online features, a better GPU which made for better looking and better running third-party games, big-name franchises, more games, a larger install base, was able to swipe up big-name franchises like GTA 4 and Final Fantasy 13, and was the better system to own at the time for the average gamer, even if they sold us all a broken system with a massive failure rate. Yeah, they would eventually replace the systems for free, but you had to call them up, and I didn't even get the infamous 360 coffin sent to me. I had to package it and mail it myself, and then I went without the system until it was shipped back to me. I don't even remember how long it took for them to get me the system back, but it was long enough. By the time 2009 came around, the PS3 had slowly and surely become a system with a great library of exclusive titles. Sony's first and second party developers had stepped up to create some of the most memorable exclusive franchises for the system, taking advantage of the power of the cell, as snarky 360 fanboys of the day would sarcastically repeat. What a fun and kind of scary generation of fanboy flame wars. The biggest exclusive of the early PS3 had released in Metal Gear Solid 4. Chances are, if you were an early adopter of the PS3, like the early adopters of the PS2 who bought it with anticipation of Metal Gear Solid 2, you bought a PS3 almost exclusively for Metal Gear Solid 4, playing the earlier offerings of the PS3 as an appetizer to the main course. The release of Metal Gear Solid 4 was a huge event for PS3 gamers at the time, and it was the biggest exclusive for the system that wasn't going to come to the Xbox 360. Well, I guess an R&D team at Konami did eventually get it running on a 360 dev kit, but Konami never went any further on the project. Ever since the 2007 E3 trailer of Killzone 2 hit, PS3 fans and diehard fanboys alike were salivating over the game, while there was still a lot of cynicism about how the game would turn out thanks to the so-so scores of the previous Killzone games and other middling efforts from Guerrilla like Shellshock. Gamers were still hyped for this game, some foolishly touting it as a Halo 3 killer again. Nonetheless, even if Metal Gear Solid 4 was the biggest PS3 event, Killzone 2's release just a couple of months after Resistance 2 was yet another exciting event in that period of time for PS3 owners. I guess Resident Evil 5 also came out around that time as well, but I couldn't care less about that game personally. I didn't get my PS3 until later that year in 2009, so I didn't get to partake in the launch of Killzone 2, but I remember the excitement for the game on the GamePro.com forums I frequented. PS3 fans and fanboys alike were incredibly hyped for this game. Resistance 2 had come out a few months prior, so the fanboys in particular had more ammunition to fling at their 360 fanboy foes to prove the power of the cell. Resistance 2, which is a game that I personally wanted to like more than I actually did when I finally played it despite loving the original, and Killzone 2 were a great 1-2 punch for those fanboy flame wars, and any outlet that dared review them lower than perfect was bought by Microsoft. For me, Resistance 2 was a bit of a letdown in the single player. I got to an annoying boss and then I just quit playing it. I can't even fully remember if I ever played its chaotic 60-player online matches or its online co-op modes. Killzone 2, by comparison, I did enjoy, even if it wasn't as good as as the fanboy hype machine made it out to be. Killzone 2 was definitely a visual tour de force on the PS3. Guerrilla used the 4 years of development to take advantage of the complexity of the cell processor, getting down into the bare metal of the system and using deferred rendering and post-processing effects to produce a visually stunning game, getting it as close as they could to the quality of the 2005 trailer. I remember the PS3 fanboys on the GamePro.com forums I frequented declaring the graphical debate between the PS3 and 360 as over after Killzone 2 release. The power of the cell had finally been tapped, and the plebeians who clung to their Xbox 3 fix-me's would never have a game as beautiful as Killzone 2. 3 fix-me fanboys would respond by calling the game Gray Zone or Brown Zone, saying they could only get performance out of the system if they used washed-out color palettes. Killzone 3 would later prove this wrong, but sitting back and seeing the fanboy flame wars of that day was actually pretty fun, to say the very least. The modern fanboy flame wars are pretty lame by comparison. Ooh, Starfield versus Spider-Man 2, who cares? The visual spectacle of Killzone 2 did come at a price in the aiming controls, which feel delayed and heavy. Even on the highest setting, the aim is sluggish feeling. Killzone 3 would later fix the aiming issues, causing Killzone 2 fans to complain about having fixed controls, to which I still wonder why that would ever be a complaint. Oh my gosh, they fixed the laggy controls. How dare they make aiming more responsive and accurate because they found a way to improve the engine to where it didn't have to handicap the aiming to keep the frame rate from dipping too low from fast aiming. Those jerks, I tell you, how dare they? The audacity. Taking place 2 years after the events of the original game, which saw the Helghast Horde invading the peaceful planet of Vecta, it is now time for the Interplanetary Strategic Alliance, ISA for short, to take the fight back to the Helghast on their home planet of Helgen. You play as Sev, a battle-hardened ISA soldier whose goal is to capture the Emperor Visari, the leader of the Helghast. At its core, Killzone 2 is a great example of a 7th gen shooter, filled with all kinds of 7th gen shooter cliches. Regenerative health, teammates you have to revive all the time, overly scripted set pieces abound in the game. You have the annoying Sev, hey Sev, go do this fetch quest in the middle of battle, a turret scene I have always hated, cover me while I hack this door, and even good old King of the Hill where you defend a position from a Helghast onslaught. Killzone isn't the Halo 3 killer PS3 fanboys were hoping for. It's actually a lot more like Kill of Duty than it is like Halo 3. That being said, 13 or 14 years removed from playing through this campaign last, I have a higher tolerance for the played out cliches in 7th gen shooters, even if I found all the boss fights in the game to be obnoxiously annoying, but not nearly as obnoxious as those in Resistance 2. One of the later scenes in the game is actually pretty epic. Normally I roll my eyes at the try-hard epic set pieces in Call of Duty style games, but there is a scene that sees you fighting your way up to Visari's palace that was epic without the normal cookie-cutter theatrics. No overdone theatrics, no overdone cinematics, just Sev and the rest of your team taking on what feels like an endless horde of Helghast, fighting hard to take every foot of ground you can. I really enjoyed this whole scene because it wasn't trying to be epic, yet by keeping it simple, it was epic. Just the player, their squad, and their guns and their wits, fighting forward on a large walkway or bridge, shoot, dodge, take cover, throw grenades, push forward to gain some ground, and then being pushed back by a Helghast onslaught and grenades. I found myself getting quiet and focusing on the task at hand. This scene feels a lot smoother and a lot less forced than similar scenes in other 7th gen shooters. It feels more organically epic without the normal added theatrics of the day. The devs just got out of your way and let you play the game, which I really enjoyed. The gunplay in the game feels great, aided by the awesome grenade cooking mechanic and the duck and cover system that Killzone 2 handles a little different than other duck and cover shooters, as it never leaves the first person view when you enter cover. Hitting the duck button on any surface that allows you to cover behind it sees Sev sticking to that surface, and players can poke their heads up to shoot at enemies either with the crosshairs or aiming down the sights. This gameplay mechanic becomes second nature in every gunfight, and adds a strategic element to the gunfights. If there is a more valid complaint other than they fixed the aiming to make against Killzone 3, it's that it rarely affords the player the opportunity to use this feature. Killzone 2 uses this duck and cover mechanic better than any other Killzone game that followed it. The enemies in the game can be be bullet sponges, but so can Sev. Unlike Resistance 2, where it felt like Nathan Hale would die if an enemy sneezed on him, Sev can take quite a bit of punishment before he succumbs to his wounds. I enjoy feeling more like a walking tank in a regenerative health first-person shooter than feeling like I have to hide every couple of seconds in a large battle. I think Killzone 2 got the balance of giving and receiving damage right. While the Doom Marine would still laugh at him for being such a wimp, Sev can still take quite a bit more damage than in a lot of other 7th gen shooters. I guess that's what the PS3 fanboys meant when they tried to justify the sluggish controls, because it helped add weight to your character. Overall, Killzone 2 is fun and I do enjoy it. It still contains a lot of the same design elements of every other mainstream 7th gen first-person shooter. Over-the-top set pieces, filler vehicle and turret scenes, fetch quests, and so many other cliché first-person shooter stereotypes that I was completely tired of only a couple of years into the 7th gen. Its strong gunplay, unique visuals, and atmosphere still make for a 7th gen shooter I would rather go back to and play over any Call of Duty single-player campaign. It has a lot of samey elements of popular mainstream shooters of its day, but it still has a unique enough gameplay style, art direction, and epic sound score to set it apart from all the Call of Duty clones of that generation. Some of my actual favorite shooters of that generation were completely overlooked and buried under the hype of bigger games. And like the original Killzone, Killzone 2 and even Killzone 3 aren't my outright favorite shooters on the PS3, but they are two of my favorite shooters of that generation as a whole. If you're interested in going back and playing Killzone 2 for nostalgic reasons, I can still say it's one heck of a ride to go back to and relive for the maybe 6 or so hours it takes to beat it. As with a lot of shooters of that generation, when developers were focused on developing both an in-depth single-player mode and an in-depth online mode, the single-player campaign lengths were shortened. Killzone 2 had a solid online deathmatch mode. I didn't put a ton of hours into it, my brother did though. Instead of fostering more of an individual on a team feel, the game catered to being more team focused. Players could choose classes like medic, engineer, spy, and etc., and team play was not only encouraged but pretty much required. Its online play was good, but its more team focus means you weren't going to see this game hosting epic MLG style 1v1s. It was more Team Fortress in approach than Halo. Success in the game required teamwork. The online servers are long gone, but like the other games in the series, at least on consoles as I can't speak for the handheld releases, Killzone 2 offers a solid bot deathmatch mode. If you never got to experience this game when it was online, the bot matches are a glimpse into how it actually played. I love bot deathmatches myself, and I appreciate the bot matches Guerrilla has seen fit to include in every Killzone game from the original on the PS2 to Shadowfall. While I think Killzone 2 is a great example of a mainstream 7th gen first-person shooter, it's not a perfect one. Outside of the fact that its design is derivative of other shooters, it was a product of its time. Most of the complaints I would wager about Killzone 2 were fixed in Killzone 3, like how the Hellgas rifle lacks the optics of the ISA rifle, making it less effective for long-range shots, and not nearly as effective as the SMG for short-range to medium attacks. I also remember missing the secondary fire functions of the original Killzone in Killzone 2, which once stripped of that satisfying shotgun blast, makes the Hellgas rifle even more generic. Generally, I only used it if there was nothing else. I also dislike how the game only lets you carry one actual rifle, and you can't get rid of your secondary revolver, so it knocks you down to carrying only 2 firearms. The boss fights are also multiple death, trial and error affairs. I forgot about one of them till I replayed this footage, but I remember dreading the final boss fight. On the normal difficulty, it was manageable but still annoying. I remember it being one of my least favorite completely cheap end boss fights of that generation. It just stuck in my mind as an annoying affair, but I found it a lot more manageable this time. I'm guessing I've played more annoying ones since, or maybe my 7th gen burnout made me hate it a lot more at the time. It's still an annoying fight, but at least it wasn't filled with a bunch of terrible quick time events like Turok was. What a terrible design idea. I remember on harder difficulties Rico being a completely useless liability during the ending sequence, constantly needing to be revived before going down again 2 seconds later. Your teammate AI is slightly smarter than they were in the original, but you'll miss the invincible AI teammates of the original Killzone, as the ones in Killzone 2 are constantly going down, requiring you to revive them, which makes them more of a liability on harder difficulties than a help. The 7th gen stereotype of bullets only count if a character is shot in a cutscene also applies here. You know, earlier when your teammate took a direct direct round from a tank's howitzer and you just zapped him back to life no problem? It means nothing if he gets shot in a cutscene. It's silly, but welcome to modern video game story designs. I know I sound a bit nitpicky with my complaints, and it's true. These are all small nitpicks that didn't stop me from enjoying the game overall. These are just my observations from playing through this game 13 or 14 years after I last played through it. Overall, the game looks great, plays well, and even the sluggish controls, which I adjusted to fairly quickly, didn't hamper my enjoyment of the game. The single player mode is worth playing through again, but it is pretty short, and basically leaves off with a to be continued. Graphically, the game is one of the best looking games of that generation, using as many tricks as possible to make a game that's art direction still makes it eye-catching to this day. This game is a testament that sometimes art direction is more important than raw rendering power. It also runs smoothly. It feels like butter. Slow butter in the aiming, but still butter. The only hitches that come from a technical perspective are these strange mid-level load sections where the game just freezes up to load in the next section of the map. At first you'll fear that your PS3 just froze up, but nope, it's supposed to happen. Other than that, it's a pretty smooth experience, and the load screens have a cool 3D motion card effect on them that can be manipulated with the 6-axis controller. The load times can be lengthy, but are manageable overall. The controls, aside from the delayed aiming, also feel pretty smooth overall. There are some forced 6-axis things to do, and this is a click in the R3 button to aim down the sights kind of shooter. The cover system in the game also feels great to use. Not a lot of complaints to wager here. It doesn't take long to adjust to the sluggish aim, and the cooking grenade mechanic is twice as fast as it is in the original, and it's just awesome to use. The voice acting in the game is top notch, and the musical score is excellent. The Killzone theme is iconic. The rest of the music in the game is also well composed. The ISA rifle sounds a bit paltry, as do some of the other guns. That's another thing that Killzone 3 would rectify. Overall, the sound design is good, with the only nitpick being some of the firearm sounds. The bottom line. Even without the online play attached, Killzone 2 is still worth going back to play through. In fact, just hunt down the Killzone Trilogy collection to get all 3 on the PS3. I am a Killzone fan. I always have been, and while I've never found Killzone 2 to be that huge killer game that PS3 fanboys made it out to be, it's still unique enough from the average 7th gen first-person shooter to go back and experience, either for the first time or the first time in a while. Its visuals are some of the best the PS3 ever produced, and the atmosphere is amazing. The gunplay is well done, especially the duck and cover system. Its release was definitely a memorable event for PS3 owners at the time, and while it wasn't a Halo 3 killer, or Halo 2.5 according to the rabid PS3 fanboys, or even a huge killer app for the PS3, only selling about 2 million copies overall, it was a great exclusive for the system during a period of time when the system was really starting to gain some momentum, and see a lot of great exclusive games being released. Killzone 2 was another good reason to own a PS3, alongside Metal Gear Solid 4, Little Big Planet, Resistance, Uncharted, Ratchet & Clank, and other previous or future system-defining exclusive titles. 2009 was a great year for PS3 owners, starting the year strong with Killzone 2, and topping it off with games like Demon's Souls and Uncharted 2. And Killzone 2 is still worth playing. And since I only just got a PS4 recently, 10 years after the fact, I can say that I've also been enjoying Killzone Shadowfall. It took the series into a more open direction in its designs, encouraging more exploration, and making the battles feel more like smaller skirmishes as opposed to big over-the-top affairs. I like the more open direction Shadowfall took the series, even if it means that some of the environments are large and empty by comparison to the previous games, thanks to the exploration element. Right now I'm stuck on some forced stealth mission which I hate, but overall I like Shadowfall. It's almost like they said, let Call of Duty do the played out Call of Dutying, and we'll design something different, with a little fun bot to use too. Obviously the game was rushed for launch, but you can see how Guerrilla was exploring more open exploration in Killzone prior to Horizon, which I'm still playing through for the first time. Shadowfall is worth playing, and while I never got to experience it online before the servers were taken down, not that I would actually pay to play online, I do have a PC, thank you, which means I have no interest in ever getting PSN or Xbox Live, because online play should be free. It also has some fun bot death matches as well. If you have a PS4 or a PS5, if you want to play it at 60 frames per second, and have still yet to play Shadowfall, it's worth playing, and it has a cheap asking price to boot.